Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf Polish Coalition Personalized Medycyny
Szanowni
and
Państwo,
Instytut
w
Nowo, I
imieniu
would like
Polskiej
to warmly
Koalicji
welcome
Medycyny
all of
Personalizowanej,
you at fifth
a
Personalized Medicine
także
Forum.
Innowo, chciałabym
This
Państwa
time is the
powitać
special forum,
na
online
pierwszym
personalized
forum,
medicine.
na piątym forum medycyny
Every day,
personalizowanej.
a whole week, we will talk
Mamy
about different
specjalną
aspects
formę
of personalized medicine,
online tego
financing,
forum.
innovation,
Przez 5 dni będziemy
value-based
rozmawiać
outcome,
o kwestiach
adherence
takich
and
jak
compliance.
finansowanie, innowacyjność. Dzień dobry Państwu, chciałabym powitać wszystkich mawców. Medycyna personalizowana jest nowym wyzwaniem dla opieki zdrowotnej. Obecnie współcześni lekarze starają się korzystać z testów genetycznych, big data, ale oczywiście wymaga to bardzo licznych zmian w systemie opieki zdrowotnej. Także mam nadzieję, że podczas tego tygodnia uda nam się dokładnie omówić to nowe podejście i dowiedzieć się, w jaki sposób można uzyskać dostęp do zaawansowanego, spersonalizowanego leczenia. Mamy z nami wspaniałych ekspertów, którzy podzielą się z nami swoją wiedzą i doświadczeniem. Chciałabym powitać pana profesora Jana Walewskiego, naukowca i dyrektora Krajowego Instytutu Onkologii. Pragnę również powitać profesora Zbigniewa Gaciąga, rektora Warszawskiego Uniwersytetu Medycznego w Warszawie. Są również z nami wspaniali prelegenci z całego świata. Bardzo się cieszę, że poświęcili nam czas, by podzielić się doświadczeniami i wiedzą. Powitajmy pana Denisa Horgana z Europejskiej Koalicji Medycyny Personalizowanej, pana profesora Freda Van Enmana, założyciela Value-Based Healthcare Europe, profesora Marka Lawlera z Center for Cancer Research and Cell Biology, a Petera Stefaniaka z Northwest Hospital Group oraz profesora Nila Wilkinsa z Karolinska Institute. A teraz chciałabym oddać głos profesorowi Janowi Walewskiemu, który otworzy forum. Dzień dobry, bardzo dziękuję. Czuję się zaszczycony, mogąc przyłączyć się do profesor Jagielskiej i profesora Gaciąga podczas otwarcia tego forum. Ja reprezentuję Instytut Onkologii, w którym podejmowane są bardzo liczne decyzje w dziedzinie onkologii oraz w dziedzinie medycyny personalizowanej. Niedawno otwarliśmy Centrum Doskonałości w dziedzinie medycyny personalizowanej i to będzie nasz wkład w medycynę personalizowaną. Również cieszę się na bogaty program bieżącego tygodnia. Będziemy mówić o medycynie precyzyjnej, będziemy mówili o dostępie do innowacyjnych leków, będziemy omawiać kwestie analizowania danych. Myślę, że da nam to nową wiedzę w tym rozwijającym się i bardzo obiecującym obszarze. Także chciałbym Państwu życzyć bardzo owocnych sesji w ciągu nadchodzącego tygodnia. Bardzo dziękujemy Panie Profesorze, a teraz chciałabym oddać głos profesorowi Zbigniewowi Gaciągowi. Dzień dobry Państwu. Witam, czuję się zaszczycony, mogąc rozpocząć to spotkanie. Mamy bardzo ciekawy temat do omówienia, mianowicie wyzwania stojące przed współczesną medycyną. Będziemy również się odnosić do pandemii COVID. Moim zdaniem w tej chwili więcej osób cierpi z powodu pandemii jako takiej niż z powodu faktycznego zakażenia wirusem. I w tej chwili w najgorszej sytuacji są ci pacjenci, którzy potrzebują spersonalizowanego leczenia. No cóż, miejmy nadzieję, że może wirus zniknie prędzej czy później, ale tak czy inaczej pozostaniemy z problemem ograniczonego dostępu do medycyny personalizowanej. Bardzo ograniczoną liczbę osób, które mają dostęp do personalizowanego leczenia. Jest to problem nie tylko w Polsce, ale na całym świecie. Bardzo cieszę się, mogąc uczestniczyć w tym wydarzeniu. To jest już 5. forum, więc tak naprawdę powinniśmy to celebrować, no ale cóż, niestety nie możemy się bezpośrednio ze sobą spotkać. To oczywiście jest wada tego spotkania, ale proszę mi pozwolić zwrócić uwagę na zalety. Są z nami bardzo ważni międzynarodowi prelegenci, eksperci. A wprawdzie nie możemy mieć bezpośrednio ze sobą mieć kontaktów, no niemniej jednak przed nami ekscytujący tydzień, podczas którego będą omawiane niezwykle ciekawe tematy. Także chciałbym podziękować za zorganizowanie tego forum i możemy zaczynać. A jeszcze może jedna informacja. Z przyjemnością chciałabym powiedzieć, że mamy polskie wydanie książki, która stanowi pewnego rodzaju Biblię w dziedzinie medycyny personalizowanej. To też jest ważna sprawa. Polska Koalicja Medycyny Personalizowanej w współpracy z Innowa przetłumaczyła tę pozycję. Wiemy, że po to, by poprawić system opieki zdrowotnej, bardzo ważne jest przyjmowanie podejścia opartego na wartości. Warto jest znać podstawowe pojęcia i zasady tego podejścia. Tę książkę można znaleźć na stronie internetowej Polskiej Koalicji. Chciałabym szczególnie podziękować panu profesorowi Janowi Walewskiemu za wniesienie wkładu w przygotowanie tego polskiego wydania. Chciałabym również podziękować Jakubowi Gierczyńskiemu i pani Agnieszce, którzy też przyczynili się do powstania tej publikacji. A teraz nadszedł czas na przystąpienie do naszych wykładów. Naszym pierwszym prelegentem będzie pan Denis Horgan z Europejskiej Koalicji Medycyny Personalizowanej, który wygłosi prezentację na temat współpracy w zakresie danych, brakującego elementu wprowadzania innowacji do europejskich systemów opieki zdrowotnej.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here at the 5th forum, and congratulations on this publication as well. So I can't believe it's the 5th year. I was there for the first meeting of this Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine meeting, and we've come a long way, and there's been a lot of developments both at the European level, the member state level, and as well now we have COVID-19, which has acted as a spur to the healthcare systems to move forward to bring personalized medicine and personalized healthcare into healthcare systems. And looking at, on COVID, in terms of I mean, because it's very much focused on a public health issue. But
Oczywiście
when
skupiamy
we
się
look
tutaj
at
na kwestiach
COVID-19
zdrowia
in the
publicznego,
area
ale
of
jeśli
personalized medicine,
spojrzymy
there's a need
na
to how do we stratify different
COVID-19,
types of patient
to
populations,
kolejnym naszym
because it
wyzwaniem
has an
jest to,
effect
jak
on different
docierać do
populations in
poszczególnych
different ways. An
populacji
issue around
pacjentów, dlatego
testing
że ta
and early
sytuacja
diagnosis and
w
use
różny
of
sposób
information
wpłynęła na różne
is of key
populacje
importance here.
pacjentów.
So I
A
have a
tutaj
presentation
dostęp
as well,
do
which I think the
diagnostyki,
organizers have.
do
So if they
badań
could show my
jest
presentation
dla
as well,
pacjentów sprawą kluczową.
this would be
Mam
helpful.
ze sobą prezentację, postaram się ją pokazać.
Which is entitled Cooperating on Data, the Missing Element
Współpraca w zakresie danych, brakujący element
bringing real
wprowadzania
innovation to European
innowacji
healthcare
do
systems.
europejskich
And this has
systemów
been a
opieki
key
zdrowotnej.
challenge for Europe.
To
How can we bring real
jest
innovation to
kluczowe
Europe,
wyzwanie dla
Europe's healthcare
Europy.
systems?
W jaki
And a key
sposób
issue here
wprowadzić
is the role of
innowacyjne
different
rozwiązania do
stakeholders to do
europejskich
this.
systemów
And
opieki
this is why
zdrowotnej.
the real significance
Po to, by
of
to
the
było
Polish
możliwe,
Alliance for
potrzebna jest
Personalized
współpraca
Medicine,
pomiędzy
because it brings
różnymi
together different
interesariuszami.
stakeholders from
I
the patient
tutaj
organizations, from the
widzimy rolę,
medical
jaką może
community,
odegrać
from the different
medycyna
disciplines.
personalizowana,
Brings
dlatego
together
że
policymakers,
właśnie
it brings together
założeniem
industry, and
medycyny
brings together different
personalizowanej
researchers
jest
in how
łączenie ze
to
sobą
bridge this area of
różnych
bringing
interesariuszy,
innovation into
zarówno
healthcare systems.
decydentów,
And there's a
jak
lot
i
of research
badaczy,
that Europe
jak
has.
i praktyków
Europe
klinicznych.
per se published
Europa
most academic publications in comparison to all
ma
regions.
bardzo
When
wiele
you look to America, as you look
publikacji
to Asia. The biggest
naukowych,
difficulty for Europe is how to bring
więcej
innovation
niż
at a quicker
Stany
and faster
Zjednoczone czy
pace.
Azja.
And this has been the challenge of Europe.
Ale
And when we look at the title of this
wyzwanie polega
conference,
na
it
przekładaniu
presented in
wyników
the right
tych
way.
badań
So
naukowych na rozwiązania
particularly the
praktyczne.
steering committee of this conference that have the title of
Tak,
Innovation, Personalization and Co-Responsibility.
Tutaj w czasie konferencji mówimy o innowacyjności, personalizacji i współodpowiedzialności jako podstawach nowoczesnej medycyny i tak właśnie do tego powinniśmy podchodzić, dlatego że interesariusze powinni zadbać właśnie o przyjęcie takiego podejścia. Agendy rządowe muszą wdrażać pewne zmiany w systemach opieki zdrowotnej, ale wcześniej muszą zrozumieć, na czym te zmiany powinny polegać. Bardzo ważne jest to, byśmy mogli szerszej społeczności przekazywać informacje o tym, jakie zmiany muszą zajść po to, by możliwe było stosowanie w praktyce medycyny personalizowanej. Ja tak naprawdę niewiele mam wspólnego z medycyną, jestem prawnikiem, głównie zajmuję się kwestiami przepisów, ale jednocześnie współpracuję oczywiście z organizacjami medycznymi, od lat już współpracuję z Polską Koalicją Medycyny Personalizowanej i staram się podkreślać rolę edukacji personelu medycznego. Tutaj chciałbym się skupić w mojej prezentacji na korzystaniu z danych. Chciałbym powiedzieć o tym, w jaki sposób dane mogą wpływać na poprawę sytuacji w dziedzinie opieki zdrowotnej. Bardzo ważne jest to, by znaleźć lepsze sposoby na analizowanie, rozumienie, wizualizację i przekazywanie danych. Ale żeby to osiągnąć, musimy zrozumieć, w jaki sposób możemy lepiej wykorzystywać dane w opiece zdrowotnej. Jak możemy użyć danych po to, by lepiej diagnozować pacjentów na przykład. A jeśli spojrzymy na COVID-19, to jest właśnie bardzo istotna sprawa. W jaki sposób możemy testować pacjentów, w jaki sposób pogrupować populację na różne grupy osób z chorobami współistniejącymi i w jaki sposób możemy dostarczyć stosowne świadczenia. Jeśli to wszystko zrozumiemy, to będziemy w stanie lepiej świadczyć usługi medyczne. Oczywiście systemy opieki zdrowotnej od bardzo długiego czasu stoją przed licznymi wyzwaniami, chociażby leczenie raka. I tutaj można się zastanowić nad tym, w jaki sposób lepiej wykorzystać dane i informacje, by lepiej diagnozować pacjentów, by lepiej się z pacjentami porozumiewać, komunikować. Także na szczeblu europejskim często inspirujemy się tymi zagadnieniami, na które zwróciły uwagę poszczególne państwa członkowskie podczas różnych na przykład konferencji.
How can we utilize digital services to empower citizens, because citizens need to understand if they will get a certain disease, how can we diagnose them earlier, and how can we have a more personalized approach? So how can we connect and share with patients and citizens the diseases that they may get so that they can have a better quality of life? So the story of personalized medicine or personalized healthcare is not only about treatment, which is a very key issue, of course, but it's also a story of early diagnosis. How do we identify patients and citizens that may have a disposition to getting a certain disease, and how can we ensure that they can stay healthier for longer? So avoiding going from a stage 1 cancer to a stage 4. So how can we capture them at an earlier stage? A lot of the initiatives around this at the European level is more around a governance framework. What is the framework to support investment and incentivize collaboration between the public and private sector to drive forward this innovation? So if I go to my next slide, please. And this focuses on these issues around what we have described as European health data space. How can we have high quality data to create and innovate? What are the rules for access and use of data to have clear governance frameworks and mechanism around this? But one area that we focused for a long time was on this general data protection regulation, which was a legislative framework. Another big dossier was the clinical trials regulation, then we had in vitro diagnostics, and now we're focusing on different other legislative mechanisms. So we're revising the pharmaceutical strategy at the European level. But a lot of these issues come down to the governance framework to support member states cooperating together and the healthcare community cooperating together, like we have now in this conference, with the input from the patients and the broader stakeholders. Because this will support the data needs for that we can work in a more European way. So it's very significant that Poland is really taking a lead in Central and Eastern Europe. What kind of political and policy frameworks need to be put in place to take account the different issues that are relative and specific to different countries. If I go on to my next slide, please. So this is around the broader European strategies around 4 key elements. What kind of governance framework can we access data? What are the enablers to support this? So Europe is allocating between 4 to 6 billion euros in terms of projects around this. I mean, what kind of competencies are needed around this? So it's very significant that, as I mentioned in my initial remarks, around the summer school and personalized medicine, and what kind of governance framework can support this European data space. So a lot of issues that the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine have highlighted are recognized in the broad pillars at the European level. The question now is, what kind of investment can support Poland being a leader in Central and Eastern European area? Because, as I mentioned, there's 4.4 to 6 billion euros going to be allocated to support projects in terms of the European data space. And this builds on the different initiatives that I've worked with the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine, specifically around this 1 million genome initiative, which focuses on how can we collect data to support and bring data into collate this data, and then help to understand which patients may have certain diseases. And now we have 22 member states that have signed up to this. And what are the competencies needed to support the medical community, but also patients and citizens to understand their own healthcare? because now we have a lot more data. The question is, how can we support this? And then what are the needs for the small and medium enterprises, so small companies, that can drive forward this innovation in healthcare systems? So who are the key leaders in Poland that would need additional support so they could supply services to support the medical community and the patients? And also, how can policymakers better understand this? So if I go to my next slide, please. So this, if I look at one area that we're focusing on, and it's a slide that was presented in my conference of last week, how can we improve how can we improve diagnostic testing? And this is a big issue around different areas, because testing is, I would say, is a big driver of personalized medicine, personalized healthcare. This is quite evident when we look to COVID-19. So we have divided this area into different areas around analytical performance, clinical performance, clinical effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and broader impact. And the key issue here is how can, looking at the IVDR regulation, how can we support better testing to improve diagnosis? And this has been a key issue across different disease areas, from cancer to diabetes to different neurological diseases. But it's come to the prominence because of COVID-19, because there was a key issue of how to test patients earlier, or test potential patients earlier, so that we can understand which patients or citizens may have a predisposition to getting a certain disease. And this issue of testing and how can Europe scale up its capacity. The driver of testing is not only to test, but it's to get access to the information, so the value of diagnostic information. So if I go on to my next slide, please. So where is the unmet clinical need, and is there an effective intervention? This is a key question, and it's been a key question in the COVID-19 period as well. But it's been a key issue through the whole life cycle of personalized medicine, in terms of personalized precision medicine. And this is a key issue that I've discussed in length with the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine. And how can we have better testing, and how can we better utilize information to drive forward this area? And if we look to another initiative at European level that's been developed, the Beating Cancer Plan, what are the needs in Poland and the needs of broader in different regions of Europe to say we can improve? What are the capacity needs? So do they need more investment in different areas? Do they need more resources? Is it more of a governance framework? So we need to be more explicit of what needs to change to support the healthcare community and citizens to have a better quality of life. So if I move to my next slide, please. So these are broad issues which I won't go into depth on. Is around the challenges, objectives, inputs, and results, and impact. So one area that we're working on is on a paper around optimal testing. So how can we improve access to biomarker testing? What is the evidence framework in terms of real-world evidence? And what is the healthcare system infrastructure needs? And all this is focusing on how can we improve and equalize patient outcome throughout the European Union, and how can different member states scale up their capacity to do this? So we're publishing a paper. It will come out in early September, just before the ESMO Congress, and we're very happy that the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine is contributing to this as well. So I won't go into detail on this framework. If I go to the next slide, please. So the European data space, again, focuses on different issues. So not only on healthcare, it also covers the different other areas. But it needs to be clear, as I mentioned, in terms of funding allocation, in terms of, how Europe will invest in this, that the healthcare community need to highlight what the benefit of more investment can bring. And COVID-19 is a very good exemplar that it needs an area of the healthcare community to scale up their capacity in how to utilize data is key, because we need to, how can we better analyze and test patients earlier? And this has been the story of personalized medicine. How can we have better access to data? And it's not only a legislative issue, but it's also an investment issue, because we need better labs and better infrastructure to support the medical community, but also better education to support the medical community in terms of, you've been utilizing all this data. and because often data science was not a big component of the curriculum of our healthcare professionals. If I go to my next slide, please. And then at the European level, also we're working on a white paper on artificial intelligence. And it's another key area. We published a paper as well, which Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine contributed to this. But artificial intelligence is a fashionable word that we utilize. But basically, what artificial intelligence is a better utilize of digital tools to analyze data and support the medical community. But different member states and different regions in Europe have different approaches. So the idea of the European level, which we're working on with them, is how can it be more of a common approach to achieve this? So how can we better standards and interoperability and better investment decisions so that we can incentivize the public and private sector collaborate together? And what is the regulatory and policy framework that can support this? Of course, we need our compliance with EU rules and values, but we also need to ensure that we keep the person in personalized healthcare. So we need a human-centric approach, which we have put forward. And this is a white paper that has come out from the European level, which we're focusing on as well. If I go to the next slide, please. So this is a nice picture of Stella Kyriakis, and she has focused on one of the areas which has come out as well from the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, focusing on this issue around European health data spaces. So this will be a key issue as well in terms of the Beating Cancer Plan. How do we better utilize data, and what are the needs of the different member states and different regions, different member states, to support our capacity so that we can have preventative strategies to support early diagnosis and treatment. And this is a key issue. And what are the investment decisions to support this? So it's a key outcome I would suggest from the Polish Alliance from Personalized Medicine to highlight the key needs in Poland that can support, the European community can support Poland in driving forward this type of innovation. If I go to my next slide, please. And this is the matrix of the European health data space. I won't go into too much detail here, but it's focused on these key pillars. One about governance, which is more about what are the frameworks allow for collaboration. So a lot of these governance frameworks is a lot around the issue around trust, as we have now, and which is in this conference here today, and what the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine have triggered over the last 5 years is how can stakeholders from the different patient, different medical community, from the payer organizations, understand the value of collaborating together around this. And then what are the issues that we can guarantee that the quality of the data that we are getting is of high quality, and how can this be ensured with of course, maintaining the guarantees of European data protection and the whole issue around ethics. And then there's different infrastructure projects that can support this. If I go to my next slide, please. And one issue that I've worked with the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine that we have led at the European Alliance for Personalized Medicine is this declaration called the 1 Million Genome, initially titled MEGA, Million European Genome Alliance. Why 1 million? Because it had a catchy acronym in terms of MEGA, MEGA. So it was easier to communicate to the politicians at the European level as well as the member states, the focus here. But the focus primarily was not to sequencing, because we can sequence very quickly. The issue was how can we have more of an interoperability and common framework to support a federated database in terms of genomics, but not focused solely on genome data, but focusing on different clinical data and other types of data sets. But a key question is, how can we have a governance framework to support this? Now we have 22 member states that have signed up to this, including Germany since February. So we have a lot of political support around this. If I go to my next slide, please. This focuses on this federated framework that will allow secure and authorized cross-border access to genomic and other health data. And this is a key issue, that the data will still need to be located at the member state level, because data is quite a sensitive issue, and healthcare is a member state competence. But the question is, how can we ensure interoperability and a governance framework between different member states, that we can have that a Europe constituted by member states can collaborate and work together. So they shouldn't be, we should respect the sovereignty of different member states as we respecting the sovereignty of Poland. But the question is, how can we ensure a common approach? And this is the key novelty of this, that we've developed a common framework through a declaration that can allow member states to cooperate together. And now this is materializing in terms of a coordinating support action, which is the funding initiative between different member states now to bring this into a reality. And this will be a 3-year project around this. If I go to my next slide, please. And another initiative that we're working on, as you can see, there's many initiatives at the European level, but this one is focused on EU for health. And how can we have a healthier and safer European Union? And it's another initiative that has come under this commission, which will run until 2024, and it focuses on, and there's an allocation funding tagged of 9.4 billion euros. And the focus here is on 4 specific objectives: strengthening the effectiveness, accessibility, sustainability, and resilience of healthcare systems. And then how can we improve the uptake of digital tools? And how can we improve implementation of new care models? So I understand, as I have come to many of the conferences of the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine, there's many great initiatives coming from different regions in Poland. There's many great hospitals, many great innovations in terms of diagnostics. So there's a lot of potential here in terms of funding, that I've just mentioned of 2 figures, one of 9.4 billion and the area figure, that the European Union is willing to support member states to do this. So key issue is, what are the needs to support Poland to drive forward this type of innovation? Because no member state is there yet. The question is, how can we move progressively there? And since the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine is taking a lead over the last 5 years, this brings a platform to bring the key stakeholders together to communicate to the policymakers on what changes should occur. If I go to my next slide, please. And different issues as well in terms of Horizon 2020. One is on genomics, and one will be on health data and interoperability. And there's other programs that will be coming out at the European level. There's a Digital European program, there's a Connecting European Facility, Horizon Europe, there's regional funding, and then of course the European Investment Bank does make investments as well. So I highlight these funding instruments to highlight there's a lot of focus on precision personalized medicine. The question is how to capitalize on this to drive forward innovation so that Poland can be a real leader in the region in terms of driving forward innovation. If I go to my next slide, please. Yeah, and then so I was very happy to be invited to the conference, and I was delighted to see the title of this conference, Co-Responsibility, because I think everybody, as the Polish Alliance has put forward, have a co-responsibility to drive forward this innovation. It's not only expecting the member states, the countries, like the government, but it's the role of the stakeholders that we have in the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine to drive forward this innovation. And we have all a collective responsibility. And by communicating effectively, then we can drive forward this type of innovation. So I'm very happy that the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine has worked so closely with the European Alliance for Personalized Medicine, for us to understand the specific needs in Poland, but also that we can work with the European Alliance with Poland to support them in what they try to do. And I now would like to give a special thanks and appreciation to Beta and Jacek at the very beginning, like they set up this 6 years ago when I was in initial discussions, setting up the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine. I would like to congratulate them how much we have come in the last 5 years to bring this initiative so much forward. And I look forward to the next 5 years. So I congratulate the whole team of the Polish Alliance for Personalized Medicine. And it was a great honor for me to be here today to present to this forum. And I wish the forum the best of luck and look forward to the wonderful outcomes of the conference. So thank you, and thank you for the kind invitation.
Thank you very much, Denis. Thank you a lot. Denis has a wide range of knowledge in the field of the health policy, and now Dan is strongly involved with the Building Patient Coalition, civic advocacy and development of cooperation platforms, supporting access to reimbursement and modern therapy. So, Dennis, thank you a very lot for your very, very interesting lecture. Dennis is a great friend of our coalition, and we are honored to cooperate with you, to cooperate with European Coalition of Personalized Medicine. And now we move to the next lecture. I would like to ask Professor Niels Wilking from Karolinska Institute to give a lecture, Divergency in the Patient Access to Innovative Medicines, Lost Opportunities, Comparator Report on Cancer in Europe with the special focus of the lung cancer. Professor, the website is yours, we can say.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Is the audio functioning?
Yes.
It is?
Yes, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. It was a bit of a trouble just before the meeting, and it worked very well yesterday. So may I have the first slide, please? This is the first slide. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this meeting. It's a great honor for me. I'm going to discuss some findings we've had over the last couple of years. Actually, we've been working on access to cancer medicines and the situation in Europe for for almost 15 years. But the data I'm going to present to you now, and also have a special focus on lung cancer, they stem from a report that we did last year, 2019. So if I have the next slide, please. As I said, this is a collaboration linked to the Institute of Health Economics in Lund, Sweden. And you have a list of the collaborators. There are Thomas Hofmacher, Gunnar Brodvik, Peter Lindgren, who are health economists. Bengt Jönsson is a professor emeritus in Stockholm School of Economics. And then we've been two oncologists, Christer Swedman and myself. My background is I've been working in medical oncology for about 40 years. And I've also had a position of being head of the largest cancer clinic in Sweden, which is in the southern part of Sweden in Lund. But you can find this report on the website. I'm going to show you some extracts from the report, and also if there is additional information that you want, you feel free to contact me. If we move on to the next slide, please. If we look at the development of trends in incidence and mortality, you can see we've here outlined what happened since 1995 until 2019, and then we've extrapolated the curves. And if the situation will develop in a similar way, we will see that we had an increase of about 50% over the years 95 to 2018. At the same time, there was an increase in mortality of 20%. This means that we are gaining some ground, at least when it comes to we have a higher cure rate for cancer. It's of notice also that cancer is actually a disease of the elderly people. About a third of all cancer cases will be diagnosed in the age group of 75 or older. So the major driver of cancer incidence and actually also mortality is age. But of course, we've seen an increase in population. We've seen also, of course, some changes in lifestyles that can influence the development of these curves. If we go to the next slide, here I concentrate on what we've seen in lung cancer, and here we outline 5 years survival in the age group in the time frame of 95 to 99, time frame of 2000, 2004, 2005, 2009, and 2010 to 2014. And some of these bars you see are hatched bars because we only have data from regional cancer registries that we have used for the whole country. If we compare this 5-year survival, you can see that there has been an increase in most countries. I think we have a bit of a registry problem if we look at the HR, and it is Croatia. They reported back in 95, 70% 5-year survival, but the later reports have stayed around 10%. You can see that the best survivals are seen in, let's say, Iceland, Czech Republic, Austria, with around 15% 5-year survival. And there has been quite a large improvement over this time period over the last 20 years. If you look at Poland, Poland has also about a 15% 5-year survival, which is it's sort of puts Poland in let's say the mid-range countries when it comes to 5-year survival, and it has increased from just about 10% and almost now 15%. So there has been quite the remarkable improvements seen in survival rates. If we move on to the next slide. Can I have the next slide, please? This is just a slide that illustrates reduction in mortality in patients in working age. And you can see in 95, those are the blue bars, and in 2018, that are the orange bars. And you can see overall that there's been quite a marked reduction in the loss of lives in working age. And actually, we see some of the countries that have made most contributions, to the right, Hungary, you see a relatively sharp decrease in lost years of life in working age, but also in Poland. And I believe this reflects also that there has been an improvement in the diagnosis and treatment of lung cancer. That has been the major reason behind this reduction. Of course, you can also see a decrease in the incidence of lung cancer, basically as a result from lung cancer prevention, more strict regulation on smoking, higher taxation of cigarettes, etc. So I think what we see has been an improvement in overall survival of younger patients in the working age, and that is to a large extent driven by improvements in the diagnostics, prevention, and treatment of lung cancer. We can take one more, the next slide here. This just shows a bit about cost for cancer and cancer treatment. And the blue bars indicate the direct cost, the cost of diagnosing and treating patients in hospital and also in out clinics. The orange bars relate to indirect cost, that is the cost for lost working capacity. It's also other costs that are related to early mortality. What we can see is that the direct costs, they have over a 25-year period doubled. So there has been quite a marked increase in direct cost, the cost for hospital care and also for medication. I will come back to that. But there has been a decrease, and that has been related to also a decrease in mortality. And then we have the hatched orange bars that sort of show other indirect costs. But we can see that the indirect costs have decreased, the direct costs have doubled. If we move on to the next slide, here we look at direct costs for how much we spend in each country per capita on cancer and cancer care. This also, relates to diagnosis, treatment, surgical treatment, radiation treatment, and of course medical treatment. It also includes salaries for hospital staff, doctors, nurses, etc. And here we look at data from 2018. And the blue bars, they are the costs in euro per capita. And the PPP means that we have adjusted this for purchasing power, which means that we try to have a similar value, try to get a comparable value in different countries. If you look to the far right, you can see that Switzerland, for example, they have a very high purchasing power, which means that in actuality, they spend over 500 euros per capita. But if we make a comparison to and adjust for the strength of the Swiss franc, that is comparable to 350 euros. If we look at Poland, you can see that the actual spending in Poland is around 50 or just about 50 euros. But if we make that into a comparable purchasing power adjusted value, that's about 100 euros. So we can say in Poland, the spending per capita is around 100 euro if we compare in purchasing power. In Switzerland, it's about 350. And you can see a lot of the countries to the right, they represent affluent Western European or Switzerland, Austria, etc. So you can overall see that there is quite a marked difference on the money available for spending on cancer care. And we can see actually Sweden, where I come from, SC, you can see it's all just about in the middle, to the left of the UK. So we are not in Sweden the big spenders, but I'll come back a little bit to comment on that. If we go to the next slide, if we take a part of the direct spending, and now we're talking about cancer medicines, we can see that the spending on cancer medicines, when we compare 2008 to 2018, which is the last year we had full data in the report. As I said, we made the report in 2019, so we had data on cancer drug sales, including 2018. These data may have changed if we look at 2019 and also about 2020. But what we see is that we spent 12.9 billion euros in 2008 in all of Europe, and in the year 2018 we spent about 2.5 times the amount, and that was 32 billion euros. So there has been quite a marked increase. Still, the direct costs have not, the total direct costs have not increased with a factor of 2.5, but the share that cancer drugs take out of the cancer budget for hospitals and cancer care, that has increased. If we move on to the next slide, here you can see the spending in 2008 and 2018 on access, on spending on cancer drugs per capita. And there you can see that countries like Switzerland, Austria, to the right, they have doubled their spending, but also countries like Poland have doubled their spending, even though they spend on a fairly much lower level than, let's say, very affluent countries like Austria and Switzerland. So the spending in these countries, in some of the Western European countries, D stands for Germany, you see Belgium, Denmark, France, they spend almost 8 to almost 10 times the amount of money per capita on cancer drugs. Of course, this includes a lot of the new drugs. A lot of this spending go to new drugs that have been launched during the last 5 to 10 years. So, and these drugs tend to come at a very high price, which means that a lot of the money, the increase is on newer drugs. And I'll have a few slides at the end of the presentation to comment on that. But before I go to those slides, just let me show you one more slide on the next. This may seem to be a very complicated slide, but we can look at lung cancer. You see in the graph down to the left, in the lower part of the left, you can see lung cancer. And here we look at direct spending on cancer, which is the x-axis, and the y-axis relates to 5-year survival. We've done the similar exercise to breast cancer, colon cancer, and prostate cancer. But for lung cancer, you can see that there seems to be more or less a direct relationship. You will find Poland spending around 100. The spending in Poland there is around 100 euros, and the survival rate is about 15. And you can see it seems to be a correlation that if you invest more money in cancer care spending, you will actually improve outcome on lung cancer. It's a bit different if we look at breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and prostate cancer, because it seems that there is a linear correlation, but then you seem to come up at the plateau that even if you spend more, you don't really achieve better 5-year survival. So what we can see is that countries should invest in cancer care to achieve higher survival rates, but there seems to be that some countries actually may overspend in relation to the results they are getting. That you can, even though you have very similar outcomes, some countries can actually achieve this by spending fairly much less money than some of the top spenders do. But let's say for lung cancer, it looks like more of a clear relationship with investment in cancer care and outcome. If we then go to the next slide, this is a slide where I have 2 slides on this, and then I've summarized my presentation. We have looked at access to lung cancer medicines, and here we divide Europe into 3 different tiers based on their economic situation. So there is an upper tier with the wealthy Western European countries. There is a middle tier which actually includes countries like France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and UK. And then we have the lower income tier, which includes mainly Central Eastern European countries. And here we look at some of the targeted drugs for lung cancer, which target either the EGF receptor or the ALK fusion protein. So this is a part of the lung cancer therapeutic arsenal. The mainstay in many countries is still chemotherapy, but of course, a lot of the chemotherapy drugs, they are generic and they are not that costly. But if we look into, let's say, the most recently approved drugs, these targeted drugs for lung cancer, they have continued, or they have increased their presence in the treatment of lung cancer. And here you can see that Poland is quite a low spender when it comes to these targeted drugs. And if we go into the other area where we've seen a lot of development, the immunotherapy area, which is on the next slide, we have the same situation. We have split up the countries according to income. And here, of course, these drugs, they are not only indicated for lung cancer, but it's very hard to split up if what share is used in lung cancer, what share is used in prostate cancer, or in renal cancer, and what is used in, let's say, melanoma. But also here you can see that Poland is on the low side. They are spending not very much money on immunotherapy. But you can also see in the upper tier, you have a country like Finland that is spending almost at a similar level as Poland. So there are marked differences across Europe. If I then take 2 more slides to summarize the findings, I think it's very important that we are able to translate research into value for patients, and there needs to be incentives for innovation. So we also need to link introduction of new drugs to outcome-based payment models. There is a great need for a new way of paying for new oncology drugs. And we need to encourage payers to implement the innovative and timely pricing and reimbursement approaches. So I think this is the most urgent area nowadays. And then for my final slides, and then I'm going to make a few comments on the COVID-19. I think, first of all, we need to have cancer plans in all of Europe. I think there is a need for a pan-European cancer plan that at least puts out a framework for the different countries within Europe and how they should work. These cancer plans need to be comprehensive, from prevention to palliative care. There needs to be evidence-based, and there needs to be a financing plan. We also need to have national-wide patient registries where we can link detailed data on diagnosis, but also on treatment. Just a final word on COVID-19. I think what we're seeing, especially in a country like Sweden, we've seen delayed diagnosis in patients with lung cancer. I think that is something that is quite urgent to really reflect on. Also, I mean, we've seen a lot of efforts going into care of COVID-19 patients. And just to compare, Sweden has been very hard hit by COVID-19, and we've spent a lot of money, but we've lost a lot of life. Actually, the mortality rate in Sweden in COVID-19 is almost 15 times as high per million inhabitants as in Poland. And of course, you can say that we are getting the disease under control, or more or less under control in Sweden. But still, if we look at the mortality rate over the last 14 days, it was 4 per million in Poland, and it's still 30 per million in Sweden. So I think we are basically very hard hit by COVID-19. And this will, of course, put a lot of pressure on all countries within Europe, including Poland, but it will also put a lot of stress on the economic stress in a country which is quite affluent, like Sweden. So with this, I thank you for the invitation, and once again, thank you for inviting me to this very interesting meeting. Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much for excellent lecture. I think that in era of personalized medicine, we should talk about the money, about the costs. Personalized medicine is really very expensive, but proper qualification for diagnostic and for the treatment, it means that money is well invested. So it means also that our patients have good prognosis, good outcomes. Agnieszka, we move further, so.
Może tylko powiem, ze względu na kłopoty techniczne musieliśmy wyłączyć na razie tłumaczenie, ale będzie dostępna cała sesja do obejrzenia jakby w internecie przez cały czas z tłumaczeniem w najbliższych dniach. Także teraz będziemy słuchać w oryginale, ale tłumaczenie będzie dostępne w ciągu tygodnia. So now I would like to introduce Professor Van Eineman. I'm really honored to see Professor, especially that value-based healthcare concept. It's becoming more and more popular in Poland. And Professor is a founder of the Value-Based Healthcare Center Europe, and he's also an initiator of the Value-Based Healthcare Prize, which is like very interesting and I think important initiate. He's also the leading and associate professor in various numerous universities all over Europe and all over the world even, like Erasmus University, the George Washington University, St. Gallen University, and many, many more. He's also cooperating closely with Michael Porter and his Harvard Business School of Economics. So he's really like experience in this value-based healthcare concept. And we're supposed to organize a workshop in March before COVID era, I would say. We have to like shift it or postpone it till October. So already I want to announce that we are planning to really organize a practical workshop when we want to show and discuss the real practical implementation of value-based healthcare. So not only talking, but also see how we can do and implement principles of this idea into practice. So Professor Eineman, please welcome, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. As you mentioned, I certainly had hoped to see you in person and to meet all the esteemed colleagues and people in Poland. I'd like to congratulate you with the Polish translation of the Value-Based Healthcare book. It's quite heavy. Don't be afraid. I will not try to do that book in 20 minutes. So I'll just pick up a couple of highlights. If you can put on the slides, that would be yeah. Thank you so much. So what I've been sort of asked to do is talk a little bit with you about value-based healthcare, share some examples on how innovation, digital innovation, may be linked in terms of implementation, and just explore that. Let me say that if you're interested in some of the implementations, please feel free to reach out to me, and maybe we'll see each other in Poland or in Amsterdam one day. My working with Professor Porter goes back to 2002. We're both trained as economists, but my personal interest has always been, of course, in strategy and economics, but mainly in implementation. So some would say the micro level. I think we had some wonderful presentations on the macro level, but I'm very, very interested personally in how do you make it work? How can you get it working with a team, with the nurses and with the doctors and with the different stakeholders to really get some fun in the team and see that we deliver better outcomes. So that is what my basic background is. Maybe next slide, please. Little bit on that background. I'm an implementation guy. So the decision group has been implementing for the last 10 years around 150 different or unique value-based healthcare projects. So I'm not a doctor, although for the last 20 years I have been interested in trying to help out in implementation. We've been helpful, I hope, with very different ones, from cardiology to lung cancer to prostate cancer, to hematology, primary care, and a couple of others, internal medicine, and at least learn a lot of the things. So that's one thing in trying to do that. Number one, Decision Institute, basically sort of under suggestion of Michael Porter, started educating people using some of the Harvard stuff originally, and then moved to more European stuff. But what I think is most relevant here is Value-Based Healthcare Center Europe, which has sort of grown out of my mailbox with people that wanted to share, learn on implementation of value-based healthcare, and that's basically where people ask me to share that. So the good news is there are hundreds of successful implementations available. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it works. So that is basically what Value-Based Healthcare Center Europe try to sort of show to the world and help its members. Next slide, please. So here are some of the winners of the prize. But let me first say, what is value-based healthcare? Value-based healthcare basically is a method by which, to put it simple, as a sort of a working definition, it's a method by which focusing on a clear definition of patient value, outcomes divided by cost over a full cycle of care for a patient, by focusing on that outcome, we want to align the different specialties. So many activities need to be done to get to better outcomes. And those specific activities are done by professionals, dietists, the patient themselves, the family. And the key thing of reaching that predetermined aim of an outcome and a cost per patient cycle requires this alignment. And as we all know here, that's not to blame, but historically speaking, healthcare delivery has been anything but aligned. It has been fragmented in specialties and certainly in oncology, but also in many other fields. We know that if we really want to move the needle, whether it's on technology, whether it's on new diagnostics, whether it's on new treatments, the key thing is to align these activities and make that team work for that patient. And that's a hard thing to do. But that is what this is about. I will not go to the examples here. I encourage you to either go to the website or send us an email, and we have some descriptions of many of these nominees and winners. But maybe for this session, one is interesting to sort of quickly discuss, which is a Diabeta. Diabeta won the Value-Based Healthcare Prize in 2017. The case description is available. And what's the issue with Diabeta? Diabeta is focusing on diabetes 1 for children, and children are here defined until the age of 21. Now, what's the medical strategic issue with diabetes 1, apart from the diagnosis? The issue, of course, is if people are diagnosed, children are diagnosed, then for the rest of their lives, they need to make sure that they test their blood, they make sure the insulin levels are okay, and they need to do that 24/7. If they don't do that, the consequences in terms of their kidney, in terms of their eyes, in terms of their feet, in terms of many other things are significant. And of course, they will end up very frequently in the acute care system. Now, that is what we all know. The thing, of course, is these are kids. It's 24/7. Although we reasonably know medically what to do, 24/7 and children, it's very, very hard to make that work. Their parents have a great influence, their school teachers have a great influence, their friends have a great influence, and these are people and children, and of course they want to have a week off, saying, not now when I'm 12, 13, 14, not now, please to adhere to this regime. I want to be off, or they may even want to try other substances, and then they will end up in the hospital. Now, how have we traditionally been dealing with diabetes 1 with children, assuming that it has some sort of been diagnosed? The first thing is we knew that the kid had the problem when they basically ended up in the hospital and they were diagnosed. And then, of course, they got instruction, their parents got instructions, they were trained, and then they went home. And that was sort of it. What has Diabeta done? To put a long story short, Diabeta has created a system using all the things on value-based healthcare, but strongly using a 24/7 surveillance with, let's say, a data center where people can call in, the children, the parents, or somebody else, but also where they can monitor frequently what is the level and what is the adherence of the child to using this insulin optimization. Now that is one thing, but the other thing then is, what if the kid is not wanting to use it or going out with their friends or whatever? So what you need is, apart from medical interventions, you need some sort of social interventions, and you need to make sure that it works in the social environment. And that is basically what they've collected in their data center. When the child has been diagnosed, then the first 3 weeks, the child and their parents go in some sort of a program, and then every now and then, with a nurse they know pretty well, they will be in touch to figure out what is the issue. But of course, the social situation of the parents, the situation in the school, the situation with the child over this lifespan is sort of the thing. Now, without going into all of the details, the interesting thing is, for instance, one outcome measure that is very fascinating for many of us, and certainly for the health insurers, is that other diabetes type centers have around 15 and even 30% of the patients that they have in their population going and ending up per year in the hospital. And Diabeta, not doing it perfectly, has 6%. And to get that going, of course, saves a lot of damage for the people and the child, but also saves a lot of money in terms of dealing with these kids. Now, without having that set up, without having a stratification of the child, not only medically, but also socially, without a 24/7 system, without a dashboard showing outcomes and predicting what will happen, this would not be possible. Are they perfect? Certainly not. But if you think about a chronic disease in this situation, then certainly diabetes is worth looking at. So I think that's sort of the way we're moving forward in terms of trying to combine digital technologies and combining that into a whole so we can deliver an integrated care model. Can I have the next slide, please? So Value-Based Healthcare Center Europe, just for your information, has been certifying now for a couple of years programs where people learn how to implement value-based healthcare and how to build that up. And that may be very interesting for some of you, because my experience is there are many different ideas about what value-based healthcare is, what patient value is, and how it should be organized. So I just want to point this out to you, that actually many people have followed this, and we think it helps with implementation. Next slide, please. So many examples. I just want to, this is of the people that sent in their applications to the 2020 prize. In November, we hope to make and announce who has been the winner of the prize, but also of the patient award, the collaboration award, cost award, and the primary care award. And we also have the most innovative new approach, which is called the Dragon Grant. So I strongly encourage you to sort of look at the people that have been implementing this and have been quite successful, not perfect, but have been quite successful in focusing on, together as a team, on patient outcomes and lower cost per patient. Next slide, please. So what is it? Without going into detail, actually there are 8 sort of elements of value-based healthcare that you need to have in place. So value-based healthcare certainly is about outcomes and about patient involvement. It's also about medical conditions and patient stratification. It's about cost and about the payment mechanism. And it's about how do you organize a value-based healthcare team across many different disciplines and across many different organizational structures. The key point is, I just want to emphasize that, is how do you create some fun for the teams, and how do you create learning cycles on improving both the patient experience, the medical improvement, the diagnostic improvement, and just the delivery of care themselves. Just to do a brief thing, there are 4 principles of value-based healthcare, which I think is useful here to do before I dive into 2 or 3 examples beyond diabetes where there has been some successful implementation. Next slide, please. So there are 4 principles, and there's no rocket science about this, but it's sort of the basis of Porter's and the people at Harvard's analysis on saying, why is it so hard to deliver healthcare? Why is it that there does not seem much of a relationship between the inputs and the outputs? Why is it that we do not find it easy to find a sustainable healthcare system? And without going into all the studies and the details there, let me just give the 4 principles of implementation. Number 1 is, and we all know this, but the value, I'm going to talk about what that specific value is. The value is created between the patient and the family and the doctors and the team. So the value is created in the interaction. Now, if the value is created in the interaction, it's probably wise to organize from that interaction. And of course, with all the new technologies, that is much easier than it may have been in the past. But historically, we have not been organizing on the patient and the interaction. We have been organizing on the disciplines, on the technologies, on the silos, but we have not been able to make that every activity that's needed for this patient / this patient stratification to organize it seamlessly. And that's why we end up with damage. That's why we end up with ping-ponging patients. And that's why we end up with incurring costs that we don't want to incur. The second principle is what's value? Now for decades, including me, We have many different ideas of what value and what costs are. There has been this whole debate on what is quality. There has been this whole debate on, is it quality of life year adjusted? Is it a process indicator? What is quality? Is it a perception of the patient? And Porter and his team has come up with quite a clear definition and saying, patient value is the delta of the outcome. It's the increase in health, either from the starting position, or if we don't do anything, what may be predicted, or it's a lower deterioration of your health, or even it's a better dying situation. Your palliative care outcome is better than if you do not do it. So number one is, what is for this patient stratification a good outcome set? Number one. Number two is, if we know what the activities are that drive this outcome, then we know what the specialties are that need to do it. Plus, we know what the costs are, because we just need to have the cost of these activities. Now, in healthcare, doctors who typically lead these teams do not know the outcomes. They may know the outcomes from the specialty typically, and they certainly don't know the cost of a cycle of care. They may know their DRG, they may know their budget cost, but they certainly don't know how much time and money is spent on an individual patient journey. And the principle is quite simple. If I do not know what the outcomes are and we do not agree, if we do not know what the costs are, how do you expect me to manage this? So no wonder that even if we reduce cost on one area, we may increase the cost in another area. Or if we reduce costs in one area, the outcomes may be worse or they may be better. So actually, we need to be damn careful if we think about macro analysis on reducing cost, because in many situations, it is actually increasing cost. So that's sort of the second bit. The third bit is this issue of value-based healthcare is a team sport. If we have very good, and I'm a big fan of personalized medicine, if we have better data, if we have better diagnostics, if we have all that, if we have better immunology drugs, that's great. But everybody and I've worked in pharma and in medtech and in hospitals quite significantly, that will only work if the delivery of that is organized in such a way that it works across teams for patients. And not just in the hospital, probably also outside of the hospital. And how do we organize that in such a way without fundamentally restructuring the healthcare system? Because that's not what the intention is. The intention is to make it work as a team, and understanding that we still, of course, have existing structures that we need to work with. The fourth one is, and I'm originally trained as an economist and a business guy, and this took me a while to understand. And some call it, as we all know here, the ugly truth of healthcare. The ugly truth of healthcare is all patients will benefit from a protocol or from a clinical pathway. Unfortunately, there's no patient that fits a pathway or a protocol precisely. So what we need in healthcare delivery is to do both. We need to create pathways that will help deliver for this individual patient within the stratification of patients carefully. But on the other hand, we need to embrace the fact that there is meaningful variation. Now, what's the thing in healthcare? There is variation that is unwanted and unneeded, and I think rightfully so. Many people point to the fact that we are doing things that are not generating value. But also, at the same time, it's true that there needs to be deviations, and there is variation, and we need to embrace this variation because it's an individual patient's level. We don't want doctors to adhere for 100% to a protocol. We also probably don't want doctors to adhere only 10% to a protocol. So it's somewhere in between, and that is what's unique on healthcare in terms of capturing that variation and not oversimplify it in a sort of a standard DRG, let me put it simple, or to make it overly complex because every patient is different. The reality is we need the teams to learn and to embrace variation. And that's basically what we can do with these wonderful technologies that we have today and that are growing in terms of IT, in terms of data, and in terms of predictive modeling. Next slide, please. Just next slide. I'm just going to skip a couple of slides there. I think they're pretty easy. You can go to the next slide. This is all in the book. You can go to the next slide. This is an example of diabetes. This is the point of variation. I think we all recognize that very, very strongly. But let me now see where we can work very closely with digital transformation. So if we want to measure patient value in terms of outcomes and cost, today we have the tools and the software and the techniques to bring that forward, to show what the outcomes are in our stratification, to show what the costs are over a specific cycle of care. So if we have those available in a scorecard or wherever you want to have it, we will be able at least to manage that better instead of not knowing what we anticipate will be the outcome. Yes, I am aware of the fact that if you're talking about precision medicine or about oncology, that the learning probably is in, we thought that we may want to achieve this outcome as a treatment plan. However, we did not achieve it. That's okay. Do we capture the fact that we deviated from the treatment plan because the patient couldn't stand the chemo, or it didn't work, or something else happened? And we need to capture that variation to have a better predictive model the next time and a better treatment plan. That's darn hard to do with the very busy doctors that we have. So how can we use our software, and there are available, how can we use our software to detect these outcomes, to detect the prediction, and certainly to make sure that we get the learning cycles and the variation working, instead of going to the next patient and adhering again in breast cancer, the 4 chemotherapies, while we can actually predict that this patient will probably only be able to sustain 2. Why would we still do 8 if we know upfront that it's very likely that it will be hard for this patient to do that? That is where we can create better outcomes. That's where we can create lower cost, and that's where we can actually create a team that works. So that's for measuring value. The other thing, of course, is this wonderful explosion of tools and techniques, and I think it's greatly propelled by COVID in many countries, in where we can have a conversation and a collection of data between families and doctors and patients and nurses, by using e-health applications, or by using, for instance, for the IC COVID patients, having a digital diary. So if people are there for 2 weeks in the IC and they survive and they come out, that they have this diary that's been filled out by everybody. So at least it's very likely that from a mental aspect, their recovery will be better. We can do those things, and I'm actually amazed with the technologies and the fast adoption of people using that. Same is true with healthcare delivery. We know that one of the key issues is, how do we plan? How do we get the diagnostic data on time? How do we get the diagnostic pathways on time? And if we don't have them, it's very, very hard, very, very time consuming, and actually very costly in not having that organized as good as we could. There are many, many examples of that. And the fourth thing is, I think, a wonderful thing that we see at COVID in many countries, including mine, where we now see software developed where people start working with dynamic protocols. So wait a minute, we don't know what to do with these COVID patients, but we have now figured out if this, it's probably best to use this treatment plan. At the end of the day, what have we learned from all these patients? Let's create a new decision tree. So I'm actually quite optimistic on the fact that we are using software and knowledge and data in a way that will bring dynamic protocols instead of protocols that are adhered to or changed every 2 or 3 years, and basically not capturing most of the patients that you will see in any significant pathway. Next slide, please. So a couple of examples, not randomly, and there are many, many more examples, but this is an example of Nightwatch. Nightwatch is in the field of epilepsy. Great system where people with epilepsy get this device, and this device is actually looking at some of their characteristics and predicting whether an epilepsy attack will happen. And actually, it's quite accurate. It's not perfect, but it's quite accurate. It will bring that to the significant other, and it will bring it to the central system. So if there is a prediction of this epilepsy going, of course, that is reducing damage and anxiety quite a lot. The fact that the system is working brings down anxiety and actually increases outcomes from that angle and reduces costs quite significantly. It's actually quite an interesting system, and since they measure outcomes, since they measure cost carefully over the cycle of care, and since they have this IT working, it's actually improving quite a lot. And of course, they hope to improve their algorithms, to improve their predictive modeling, and to improve their stratifications and see if there are other things that will actually help reduce the possibility of having this epileptic attack. Another thing similar is HeartWatch 24/7. It comes out of the cardiology bit, and it's a sort of a system with where you have been a cardiology patient. Number two is you'll have some devices and you'll have your mobile phone, and with that mobile phone and these devices, you can check how are you doing with your blood. You need to do that regularly, but if you are in Singapore and you've put that in, and actually the doctor says, well, wait a minute, there's a danger here. We will call this hospital here. They're going to pick you up. No worries yet, but you're going to be in safe hands. And the system is actually working. And it's working more and more and more. Why? Because these cardiologists said, Fred, we have a patient who had a cardio problem. We know one thing for sure. The best predictor of the next cardio problem is that you had a cardio problem. But the thing is, we will only see that person every 6 or 12 or 20 weeks. And when that person is in, they come in and I'll ask, how you doing? And say, well, we're doing reasonably okay, happy we live. Okay, take care of your pills, take care of your exercise, of your diet, enjoy. But they don't tell me, doctor, a week ago, I really had a problem. That was a hard time. So it's a 24/7 chronicle thing. And we have organized this in a strange way. We only see everybody 6 or 20 weeks, and we have health economists, and I have good friends who are health economists, and I love them, who explain to us that on average, 20 weeks is enough. But as an individual patient, that doesn't tell me anything that on average 20 weeks is enough, because I want the 24/7 thing. That's the big change that we see with prevention medicine. I like to point out to AWIL, there are other companies as well, who's done this dynamic protocol creation, this dynamic planning in a software package for lung cancer and for other parts, but they sort of won a prize for the lung cancer approach together with a couple of hospitals, where they basically said, we have the standard protocols, we have the case mix or the initial patient condition variables, we will have all those pathways and we'll have it figured out with the nurses, with the doctors, with the planners in the hospital, with the patients, what is best for them in terms of outcomes, what's best in terms of activities. We'll have a planning system with it when they need to come. We will have an e-health that will provide the information to it, but the doctors and the nurses can actually change their pathways in terms of, wait a minute, for this patient, this is probably a wiser step. This is probably something we want to check, either because they put in a quality of life angle, or there is some other thing that we find is interesting. And actually they create something of dynamic protocoling and dynamic planning, but they stratify based on outcomes. And so they see, this is ridiculous, we did this, doesn't make any sense. We tried to do this, we had an idea, we see it may make some sense, but we need to change this, and we actually can reduce the things that we're doing, or we can increase the things that we're doing. So actually, more and more examples of trying to do that. Next slide, please. So actually, it's not rocket science, this value-based healthcare stuff, but it's basically we need to focus on patient outcomes and costs. We need to stratify patients, and our focus on the delivery should be, how do we organize the teams so that all the activities that are needed for that patient are seamlessly organized. And the good thing is, whether it is in deciding about immunotherapy, whether it's deciding about diabetes, whether it's deciding about epilepsy, whether it is in social health, we need to figure out, first on stratifications and then on refining that to the individual patients, how can we organize it so that patients and society will get the benefits of all this expertise, and that not the super specialist expertise will basically be ruined because the next step in the cycle, in the chain, is not doing the correct thing or is doing it too late. Then we bring in new medicine, then we bring in new treatments, then we do great things, and I admire doctors doing great things, but actually it's not going to reach the potential that we want to have. We will have readmissions, we will generate much more cost, and we will actually not create a sustainable health system for ourselves and for others. Next slide, please. Are you there? Yep. So some of the examples, and I find it quite interesting in how we are now trying to use different types of technologies in terms of tracking corona. The first one is, I think, a quite simple one, but it's basically you can download the app and you can look if you have the symptoms. That works quite well. It sort of seeks out if you need to call a doctor or not call a doctor. I'm not very convinced yet that it's perfect in terms of the positives and the negative faults that it has, but it's at least an algorithm that they're improving and improving. Then you will get a doctor on the phone to see what you need to do or if you need to get a test or not. But the interesting thing is they try to improve the algorithm, and it certainly has helped in my country reduce anxiety and at least track and trace patients a little bit better to hospitals. But I would concur with my Swedish colleague here that we've learned a lot, let me put it that way, by not stratifying patients and patient groups and approaches and teams accordingly to COVID. I think like many countries in the Netherlands, we basically were focused only on intensive care. We had this total lockdown, more or less. And actually, we took all specialties away from regular care to make sure that we could do our intensive care. We had in my country, in my view, this disadvantage of having the lowest number of ICU beds per capita without plans to adjust that if we needed more. So you can imagine that I think we have an underestimation of the numbers of deaths, although we're not in the Swedish angles, but I think we're closer to Belgium in terms of avoidable deaths. But we'll see. We hope, but we will have a committee that will come up with real facts. But more importantly, is that will work. This app is improved to see if we can stratify and if we can create better teams to deal with patients instead of having one patient at a time. There's more. I know Apple and Google have been tracking and tracing. We see more telehealth examples, and actually it's changing the primary care doctor's role, and they showed that they were really willing to come into a new role. So actually, I'm quite optimistic on the fact that also doctors in primary care and social workers and health workers are now thinking more about stratifying patients instead of just reacting to when there is an immediate problem. And hopefully that will result in more prevention incorporated in delivering care from a micro level, not per se from a macro level. Next slide, please. Okay, well, that's the final one. I gave you a little bit of a quick micro. I hope you got my my enthusiasm about value-based healthcare implementation. I've been working with some companies on how can you get immunotherapy and how should that be contracted? How could you sort of implement that, knowing that immunotherapy does not fit the traditional types of lung cancer or other cancer, but it's basically a different mechanism that you need to think about. I'm looking forward to work with you and with my Polish colleagues. And I hope that at least it gave you a little bit of feel of why I think value-based healthcare and delivery of care using all these great technologies will really amplify healthcare, and I think will make a big contribution to creating more sustainable healthcare systems and solving for macroeconomists the fact that, oh, we had this idea, but it doesn't work on the micro level. Yes, that's because this is healthcare. And on the micro level, stratifying a little bit more and being able to tell to the population and to the world what it is that doctors and teams are actually contributing to us beyond the great admiration that I personally have and many people have of what the healthcare system and the people working there have been able to achieve for the last decades. I thank you very much, and I hope to see you in October or online or anywhere else and share with you the good and the bad about implementing value-based healthcare. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Einerman. We're really looking forward to continue the discussion during workshop in October. So welcome you all at the moment. And now, please let me introduce Professor Mark Lawler, who is from Centre for Cancer Research and Cell Biology from Queen's University, Belfast. Professor Mark Lawler is very entitled expert and involved in many initiatives. Mention a few, like he's a member of Scientific Advisory Committee for Genomics England and the European Cancer Patient Coalition, as well as a member of a board of the European Alliance for Personalized Medicine and co-chair of the Cancer Task Team of the Clinical Working Group of the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. So Professor Mark Lawler will present a keynote speech about precision cancer medicine, health data, and personalized health in the era of COVID-19. So please, welcome, and we're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to Beata for inviting me. If I could just have my slides, please. Next slide, please. On the 29th of March of this year, my uncle died of COVID-19, and when I was talking to Edward Vodoliak, who's a very good friend and colleague of mine from the University of Split in Croatia, as well as sympathizing with me over my uncle's death, he also started to tell me about the challenge that he was facing, and it's encapsulated here where he said people are starting to fear a COVID-19 diagnosis more than a cancer diagnosis. And that got us really worried. Myself, and Richard Sullivan wrote an opinion piece in the European Journal of Cancer. But we decided the important thing to look at in relation to COVID-19 and cancer was data. And how could we use data to really look at what was the real situation, what was happening, and then how could we use that data to respond to the crisis. We did two approaches. There's a collaboration between DataCan, which is the Health Data Research Hub for Cancer in the United Kingdom, and University College London. The research, which is really hot off press, so I'm really sharing with you the very latest data on this. I was looking at real-time data for effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. So in terms of the real-time data analysis, we analysed data from hospital trusts across the United Kingdom, and we looked at two measures that are routinely captured. And the first is urgent cancer referrals. We call them 2-week waiting in the United Kingdom, but it's really looking at urgent or red flag cancer referrals. And this is an early warning system for a suspicion of cancer. And then we also looked at chemotherapy attendances, which we felt was a proxy measure of the health of the cancer service, particularly in terms of delivering therapy. Next slide. We looked from January 2019 to look to see what was the background or the seasonal variation in relation to both chemotherapy attendances on the right and on the left-hand side, urgent referrals. And what you can see there is you see around the Christmas time where you see that dotted line coming down, that shows you that you get a drop at Christmas time, but it comes straight back up again after Christmas. Well, what we can see then is in the February-March time, there's a significant drop in relation to both urgent referrals and cancer chemotherapy attendances. Next slide, please. And this drop was very significant. So what you can see there, different trusts, 68 to 84%, an average of 70% drop in urgent referrals and a 41% drop in relation to chemotherapy. So very significant indirect effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. We then started to look at what was happening during the lockdown in the United Kingdom, but also as we came out of lockdown. And what you can see there is, you see that very significant drop in both urgent referrals and chemotherapy. But what you can see is, although there is some recovery happening as we emerge out of lockdown and as we redesignate cancer services, we still see very significant drop in relation to pre-COVID-19 levels. Next slide, please. And this is reflected, so we see a recovery, all right, so it was at 70% in relation to urgent referrals, but we're now still 44% below what we were pre-COVID-19, and similarly for chemotherapy, 41% drop initially, we've recovered somewhat, but only to 31%. So these are really significant challenges that we're facing in terms of rebooting our cancer service and making sure that that can be used to effectively treat cancer patients, to avoid delayed diagnosis, delayed treatment, etc. Next slide. We also looked at diagnosis of cancer, and we can see here again a significant drop in relation to what we would expect to see based on our 2016 to 2019 average. You can see a 30% drop there. Next slide. And this is particularly severe if we look at diseases like lung cancer or prostate cancer, where we can see there are very significant drops in cancer diagnosis compared to the average that we would expect. Next slide. We also looked at effect on cancer clinical trials, and you can see essentially it's nearly obliterated clinical trials, greater than 80% of trials suspended during the pandemic. Next slide. What we then wanted to do is say, well, what effect is this going to have in relation to potential excess deaths of people with cancer over the next 12 months? And we used the data that I've showed you to really model, but to model in excess mortality in a data set that we've carefully curated over the last number of years of 3.8 million primary and secondary care data linked. This data set is very useful because it can look at 24 different cancers within it, but also 15 underlying additional health conditions or comorbidities. We modeled different scenarios to determine what were the excess deaths that were indirectly due to the pandemic. And as I said, use that real-time data that I've already shown you to inform that model. Next slide. What we can see here, and just concentrate on the bottom really, so this is showing you the different cancers and the relative risk in relation to excess deaths. And what we can see there is if 40% of the population, so the middle set of panels there, are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, we can see there's a excess death rate between 7,100 and nearly 18,000, and that will rise to 35,000 in the worst case scenario, where 80% of the population are in some way affected by the pandemic. Next slide. Next slide, please. We also see that within the excess deaths that we've already seen from the previous slide, we see also a significant number of comorbidities. So 8 out of 10 of those cancer patients will have at least one comorbidity. Cardiovascular disease and hypertension tend to be the main ones. Obesity, diabetes, and COPD also important, although the numbers, percentages will vary depending on the cancer type. This is really important because it shows you that not only do you have effects in relation to COVID on cancer itself, but also on other comorbidities on cancer. But that also gives you an advantage because it shows you what maybe these conditions that you can actually intervene in relation to cardiovascular disease, hypertension, etc., and so reduce the risk of excess deaths. Next slide. Just in relation to that data. Next slide. Next slide. And these are some other papers that we're working on, looking at 2-week weight pathway overall for cancer, looking at impact specifically in colorectal cancer, which I'm really worried about because we also have the additional problem in relation to that we've essentially stopped all screening for colorectal cancer. And endoscopy services are not back up and running yet. So this again leads to diagnostic delay and potentially therapeutic treatment for colorectal cancer. Next slide. If we looked internationally, we started to look at what was happening elsewhere, and we saw different sets of data at different stages, some published data, but relatively scarce. We presented our data to the European Cancer Organization, which is the largest multidisciplinary cancer organization in Europe. A lot of interest, anecdotally similar data across Europe, but drops less profound. Krul and myself are now co-leading a European Cancer Organization special network on COVID-19 and cancer. You can see the website there, and would certainly welcome anybody in Poland who wants to participate in this. Next slide, please. If we look at some of the early data from international studies in the Netherlands, and Fred mentioned this, or partly mentioned in his talk, we did see a drop in cancer diagnosis overall, approximately 26%. So less than in the United Kingdom, probably related to the fact that the Netherlands made a decision fairly early to go to what I would call hot and cold hospitals, so hospitals that are designated only COVID-19, and then hospitals that have cancer services in COVID-19 light circumstances. Look, in Eastern Europe, again, we see significant drops in relation to these surgeries, etc. And similarly across the pond in the United Kingdom, the United States, I should say, and you can see there particularly drops in relation to cancer screening, be it cervical, colorectal, or breast. Next slide, please. So we shared our pre-submission with our government, with our NHS, National Health Service, with the National Cancer Director, and with SAGE, which is our emergency committee. We felt these data were too public. Organisations have been very supportive and have been very interested in our data. British pharmaceutical industries have also said that data needs to be supported. Care. In the research community, the last time I looked on research data, there was nearly 15,000 hits on research data, significant coverage in the media, even a media question to our Prime Minister Boris Johnson on his first day back after returning from hospitalisation due to COVID. And tonight there will be a programme on BBC on Panorama looking at the whole issue in relation to COVID-19 and cancer. Next slide, please. And this just shows you some of the coverage, but I think what's important is the rapid availability of health data meant we could respond quickly to the crisis. So it's very critical that you're able to access this data in real time. We were able to get this data in real time, and I'll show an example. Again, just highlighting those numbers, leading to 7,000 to 18,000 excess deaths, but in the worst case scenario, that could go up to 35,000 deaths. And one of the things I think that COVID has taught us is that rapid access to real-time or near real-time data must be the new normal, because that can not only inform health response, but also societal. So why do we need real-time data? This is looking at the national data that's available, but as you can see, I looked at it on June the 9th, but it's only available up to March. So you can't really see much of an effect in relation to COVID and its indirect effect on urgent referrals. Next slide, please. Next, if you look at then on the right-hand side, you can see here, previous slide, please. What you can see here is because we were able to access real-time weekly data, we were actually able to see in great detail what was happening. And you can also see that this data, and when I looked at it on the 9th of June, it was very much up to date. The data we had was actually a readout from the 5th of June. So we're able to get data in real time and use that to inform our understanding of what COVID was doing, and then looking at how we can mitigate that. So for example, this is from one particular centre in Leeds. You can see that Leeds 3,200 missing diagnoses or potential diagnoses. Next slide, please. So what are the implications of this study? data on both excess deaths and the perturbation of cancer care really have profound implications for health services. We don't think this is unique to the United Kingdom. This is global, based on the data we've seen anecdotally from other centres. It highlights why unlocking the power of data is so important. Absolute requirement to access data in weekly data and in real time or in near real time. We hope that we've also encouraged the hospital trust by this study to really look at a culture change in looking at much more rapid and much more precise data deployment for and feel that it's helping lead that recovery and to deliver the new normal, as I've said. Next slide, please. And so really we feel that this is just a very good example in real time, influencing cancer policy and using data to really improve cancer care for cancer patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the excellent lecture. And now we move to the last speaker in this session, Professor Peter Stepaniak. Professor Peter Stepaniak is very active in management of healthcare system. He is advisor health operation management, Northwest Hospital Group in the Netherlands. He is also an international hospital consultant in the field of managing health operations. So, Professor, could you give us a lecture, please?
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Could you
was me better now?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, super.
Now
Well, thank you for the invitation and welcome from the rainy Holland. It's quite windy and a lot of rain, but I'm in a warm house. So can you open the presentation, please? Today, I want to take you on a journey we had with multiple hospitals in Holland, enjoying finally a journey towards creating value for our patients. And it starts a long time ago, even before the time I was in joining the Catharina Hospital as manager of the operating rooms. Next slide, please. Something about myself. Long time ago, I studied econometrics and economics. I was also a strategy consultant. And in the last years, I'm more and more interested in how to optimize healthcare processes using mathematics, statistics, but also using the input from doctors, from teams, finally to create better outcome. I'm not a doctor, but I like to model. I like to think in a different way and help finally doctors to create pathways where patients are put in the central and where we create finally value for our patients. And besides that, I'm also a commercial pilot flying, I think, 10, 15 hours per month. Next slide. And this presentation is based on a paper presented by the Santion hospitals in 2017, partly. And Santion hospitals are hospitals who started to operate in 2007. And the reason to start to cooperate in that time was to finally lower the cost for medical supply, because every hospital paid, well, as everywhere in the world, we pay a lot for getting medical supplies. And to lower the unit cost, they thought, okay, we go to work together. But then there was the idea, if we work together, why can't we also share medical data about patient data about treatment of patients, and how can we learn from each other finally to increase the value we give for our patients, lower costs, and finally to have let's say in this way, a happy patient. So that was the start of the cooperation. So it's quite unique that many hospitals are sharing data, are talking, discussing about treatments, and trying to find the best way for treatment for patients. Next slide. As said, it was finally the value-based healthcare initiative was launched in 2012. In Holland, we report a lot of outcomes. We have many databases where doctors have to fill in what happened with the patient, whether he was operated or reoperated or not, etc., etc. Many people were busy with this, analyzing this data, but finally it was not put into in efforts to improve outcomes. And also analyzing and collecting all the data costs a lot of money and still costs a lot of money because there are overhead activities, and it would be nice to combine this data and do something with the data for the patient. So that was also the basis to launch this VBHC initiative. Next slide. The Santion value-based healthcare program consists of two parts. We had a care for outcome and a care for improvement. We started with lung and prostate cancer, and many data was analyzed, and the data was also adjusted, of course, for case mix, and we were, or not me especially, but the doctors were looking for variation. As Fred said, variation is finally the key. Understanding variation is finally the key for improving value for patients for future treatments. So if you understand the variation, and you're not afraid for the variation, and finally you are a king because you can make healthcare better for patients. Next slide. So this is the variation, to understand the variation in outcomes. Next. What you see during these, what you saw during this journey is that doctors were more and more keen to evaluate their outcomes, to learn from the outcomes, to discuss the outcomes, and to discuss this in using systematic evaluations with multidisciplinary teams. An example I heard last time during a conference, but it happened also in my hospital, is that, for example, within a team of urologists, there was, they shared monthly the data about the effect of treatment for patients, and they saw that one surgeon especially had somehow better outcome. And this team of urologists consists of older urologists and some younger, and the younger one had better outcomes. And the nice thing is that you want to achieve a situation where even the oldest urologist, the oldest surgeon, is open to learn from the youngest resident, or the youngest urologist in this case, and to see what he is doing, to learn what he is doing, resulting in a better outcome. So finally, this older urologist with a lot of experience went to the OR with the youngest urologist, and he showed him how he did a specific surgery in a specific case. And finally, that was the standard. So to be open, to learn from each other, to have an open mind. So the attitude is extremely important to make this change and finally to create value. Without changing this attitude, without being open, well, it's hard to achieve anything. It's our experience. Next slide. Finally, they made also predictive models. because not every patient should have the same treatment. Sometimes it's needed that in some case only 2 times chemotherapy is enough, and for some patients 4 times would be enough. And for example, the team noticed that for some elderly patients, they undergo this radical prostatectomy. They had a lower rates than expected. And they realized, after analyzing all the data, that they were likely to have a poor survival based on age, tumor, and aggressiveness and comorbidities. So they offered this patient also other treatment. And that's also good to understand. You finally have to create predictive models, not making one pile of patients, but making differentiate patients, because not every patient is the same. So finally, to give the right treatment to the right patient. Next slide. And when they start to cooperate together, what you see on the left side, figure 2a, that the reduction in surgical complications reduced significantly when working together from different centers. So urologists started to work together from different centers. They shared the data, they shared the outcomes, they learned from each other, and the result was a reduction in surgical complication, but also a reduction in positive surgical margin after 1 year of prostatectomy, which is seen in the second figure, 2b. So it proves that working together, learning from each other, using well, it's technical said, the improvement cycles, finally increases the outcome. Next slide. Next. Yeah. The most important, finally, as said before, is not only the technique of the doctors, because they studied a lot and a long time. My wife is surgeon and she is still learning every day. But also it's important to involve patients in the journey to increase finally the value for healthcare. And also to note what they experience during their journey of sickness. And next slide. So there are some measurements, scientifically validated measurements to capture the experience of patients during their journey. Well, it's a little bit strange saying their journey in their healthcare, but when they are sick, they experience a lot nice things, but also things the organization has to know to improve finally the service to this patient. Next slide, please. So there are some questions you can ask as an organization to the patient. And for example, question number 15, when you arrived at the hospital or surgical facility, did the surgeon visit you before surgery to calm down you, to ask you if there are any questions, if something is unclear, if you are ready for surgery? And you're surprised, and I visited many hospitals worldwide, that it's not the standard. For example, the answer should be, like the question number 16, did this visit make you feel calm and relaxed? Having a stressed patient is the last thing you want to have. You want to have, of course, everybody will be stressed undergoing surgery, but you have to do everything to calm down this patient. A simple one, but an obvious one, but sometimes not asked and sometimes also observed, is that we don't ask if a patient felt any pain during surgery. Sometimes there are, of course, patient gets anesthesia, but we learned also from our experience that sometimes some anesthesia was needed to prolong, or we had to add some more painkillers, to give some more painkillers to patients to lower the pain. Next question. Next slide. And also, like question number 35, your overall care from the surgeon. Finally, a surgeon want to have and must have a feedback from his patient. A doctor has to learn from the experience the patient had in the hospital, finally, to improve the journey the other patient will get, the next patient will get after this patient. And finally, in future, to increase more and more in the value we give our patients. So this is very a transparent way of of reporting, of asking, but it's the only way to learn as an hospital. Next slide. And what we introduced in the OR, but it was in our hospital also introduced in other departments. It's called mirror conversations. I have not another English terminology for it, but what we did is we went or to patients and their family, or we invited patients to the hospital with their family. And in the hospital was the team or a representative of the team treated this patient. So it could be a doctor, anesthesiologist, nurse, but also somebody who is working at the entrance of the hospital, just to discuss in positive way, to learn from the patient. Okay, what was your experience entering the hospital? What was your experience in the queue when you were waiting in the outpatient department? What was your experience in the OR? And learning from this kind of, we learned from this kind of, from these discussions that patients undergoing surgery for oncology surgery, they needed finally more attention. So we decided also to create more time for the patient, moving the patient from the holding to the OR, not to leave the patient fully alone, but to really spend more time, quality time, let's say, for this patient till the moment he went to sleep. And because it can be very traumatic, this kind of surgeries, because there are also surgeries like a Whipple, where you know that when you wake up early in the recovery room, there is a high chance that probably nothing can be done anymore. So it will be also a message for you that your life will end soon. And to take care of that patient in that state, on the moment he awakes, to be there for the patient, it's really important. So that we learned from our patients. Next. And of course, we measure other technical things from patients, what they report in terms of their outcomes. We measure symptoms like distress, anxiety, and unmet need. And that's that part we try to fill in with our mirror meetings. Next slide. And here are some examples you can find on internet. It's easy to translate. It's very clear. And it's a simple way of learning from what's going on with the patient and how to improve finally the care we give to our patients. Next slide. And here are some questions about mobility. You can ask this kind of questions to patients depending on what kind of treatment they underwent every 1 to 3 weeks or every month. But finally, you get a good, indication how the patient is doing. Next slide. And finally, there's an overall score, which gives you, it's kind of situational awareness, where the patient is in recovering, or it's also important for patients who will not recover, but finally will die, because we want also to create value for patients in their last way, and that's the way, the moment they die. So to have a comfortable pathway without any pain to the moment they die, and this is even important than taking care of patients who will recover. Next slide. What was a challenge, and still is, in some hospitals, but less in the Santion hospitals, is that doctors are used to focus more on volume than on patient outcomes, because volume is money, and money is income, and it can contradict, of course, with outcomes. So volume should be on the second or third place. The focus should be more from doctors to patient outcomes, and that's the change they should start with this kind of thinking. Yeah, next slide. And of course, we had, based on this other way of thinking, based on thinking in terms of outcomes, with also to negotiate the budget with the insurance companies. And finally, we made a deal, or not me, but the hospitals made a deal where they say, okay, the reimbursement based on value-based healthcare approach is this way, that the moment we improve with 1 percentage point the outcome, then the overall budget will increase with 2.5 million euro yearly. But also, on the other hand, the moment we decrease, there's decline in outcome, hospitals should be and must be at that point forced to improve the outcome, but the budget is then also lowered with, for every 1 percentage point, 2.5 million euro. And of course, it's not a way of punishing, it's a way of challenging hospitals to make it not only to make it more efficient on the first to create more value, but also to try to find inefficiencies, and to make it more efficient. Next slide. So the key lessons, because that's why I also was invited here, is number one is attitude from doctors, from nurses, from management. And number two, next slide, is attitude. And number three is also attitude. So that's, and what I said in the beginning, is extremely important. And when you start, then start to analyze. Don't make it too complex. Start with data you have, because you can get really frustrated the moment you don't have the right data, or you want to make it yourself too complicated. And the key is to conduct the basic analysis using trends and investigate further if there are interested patterns in these trends. And finally, from the trends, you can learn. Next. What also we found is that trust among doctors is the oil which makes it happen. So if doctors don't trust each other, if hospitals working together don't trust each other, and that took a lot of work to create this trust, then it's hard to have a success. Also to involve, as I said, the patients, because finally we do it for the patient. Next slide. And on a high level, all stakeholders involved, from ministry, health insurance, and patient organizations and healthcare providers, should embrace the concept of healthcare. And that was my contribution. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for a very excellent lecture, and it was the last lecture on the first day. Tomorrow, the role on innovation on personalized medicine, challenges and barriers. Thank you all experts for presenting interesting lecture. Thank you all participants in this session. So, to see you tomorrow. Dziękuję Państwu za udział w tej sesji. Jutro przed nami innowacje w medycynie personalizowanej, wyzwania, bariery. Również mamy wielu interesujących wykładowców, a także debata prowadzona przez pana profesora Zbigniewa Gacionka. Zapraszamy na dzień jutrzejszy.
Dziękujemy.
Do zobaczenia.
Do zobaczenia.